been thinking a lot about SAPS lately. That's the South African Police Service, or as I like to call it, the Sometimes Arrive Possibly Solve Force. If you've ever wanted a real-life comedy show with guns and outdated vehicles, SAPS has you covered. Oh yeah, except instead of laughter, you're usually crying into a case that's been ignored for about 6 months or more. And honestly, if it weren't for the fact that people's lives are at stake, SAPS could easily be the greatest sitcom South Africa has ever produced. I mean, it has everything. The drama, the bad timing, outdated props, questionable casting, and a storyline so ridiculous you'd think it was written by a budget Netflix writer. Let me set the scene for you to put you on game real quick. South Africa's police force is like a sitcom that nobody asked for, with a budget smaller than your uncle's braai fund, but expectations higher than Julius Malema on a podium. SAPS has managed to outdo itself in creating what can only be described as a real-life parody of what a police force should be. If the purpose of a police force is to maintain law and order, SAPS is like that three-legged dog trying to win a greyhound race. It's tragic, but you just can't help but watch in disbelief. Now, before I dive in, I want to make something very clear here. This isn't a hit piece on every individual officer. I'm not targeting anyone here. There are some genuinely hardworking men and women in the force who are doing their best with the tools they've been given, right? We can all agree with that. But the problem is that the tools are about as effective as a plastic fork in a steakhouse. Outdated weapons, dilapidated police stations, and patrol cars that look like they've been stolen from a Mad Max set. It's so bad that even the criminals feel sorry for them sometimes. Let's talk about SAPS equipment, or rather, the lack of equipment thereof. Because imagine running into a life or death situation and having to use a gun that jams more often than a DJ at a Pretoria house party. That's SAPS for you. Their weaponry is so outdated that criminals are walking around with better gear than the police. I'm not even joking here. You've got officers trying to fend off armed robbers with weapons that belong in a museum. It's like sending a caveman into a nuclear war armed with a rock and good intentions. SAPS officers are going into battle with guns so old and unreliable, they'd make museum curators jealous. I'm not even joking. There's a headline not long ago that read, "Police officers quit SAPS over outdated equipment and low morale." From the Times Live, it was in November 2024. Imagine being in a gunfight and then your clock jams because it's old enough to have voted in the 1994 elections. Meanwhile, the criminals are out there armed with AK-47s, RPGs, and Wi-Fi routers faster than the SAPS network. How do you expect to win a war on crime when your weapons belong in a Pawn Stars episode? This isn't Call of Duty. It's more like Call of Do we even have enough bullets for this month? Rumor has it some officers are so desperate that they are considering using slingshots. Just imagine a SAPS police officer shouting, "Hey you criminal, I'll hit you with this perfectly polished stone." That's right, I've got better aiming than Rey Mysterio when he hits his opponents with a 619, because that's the exact issue they're facing. They are tired of risking their lives with equipment that might as well be paper mache, so that's why they're quitting. Just last year, Times Live reported that police officers were leaving SAPS in droves, citing unsafe working conditions and outdated weaponry as key reasons. And honestly, can you really blame them? Let's be honest, if I had to patrol a dangerous neighborhood armed with nothing but a prayer and a gun that looks like it was crafted when Michael Jackson was still black or by the Anglo-Boer War, I'd quit too. But the equipment isn't the only problem. The vehicles. Oh, the vehicles. SAPS patrol cars are a thing of beauty if you have a fetish for skoros. I've seen more reliable cars in scrapyards. There are online videos of SAPS cars breaking down in the middle of chases. Imagine you're a criminal running from the cops and then you hear the patrol car sputtering to a stop behind you. Like it's just going... You'd probably turn around and then give them maybe a middle finger and a thumbs up for trying. I mean, would you stay in a job where you're expected to chase down hijackers in a Toyota Tazz that barely starts? Be honest. SAPS vehicles are so bad, I'm convinced half of their budget goes to duct tape and prayers. It's gotten so bad that some officers have to use their personal cars for work. Imagine being pulled over by a SAPS officer driving a VW Polo Vivo with fuzzy dice hanging from the mirror. The resignation problem is the real one though. It's not even the fuzzy dice. SAPS is losing officers faster than an Eskom power outage loses electricity. And can you blame them? Again, can you blame them? If they have low pay, They have outdated tools and constant danger. It's like being asked to babysit a bunch of rabid toddlers while being paid in monopoly money. And let's not forget the morale issue. These officers aren't quitting just because of the paychecks or the weapons like everyone thinks. No, they are quitting because the system treats them like background extras in the crime movie that is called South Africa. But unfortunately, I can't talk about SAPS without talking about their ultimate talent, am I right? What they're really known for, and that's their ultimate unreliability. Their unreliability is the sore spot. SAPS has the uncanny ability to show up when you least expect them and then disappear when you need them most. It's like they've mastered the art of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The complete opposite to what Batman is supposed to be. I once heard a story of a guy who reported a stolen car. SAPS arrived 6 hours later just in time to find the car being driven past by them, by criminals. You'd think they'd give chase, right? Wrong. They turned to the guy and said, "Well, at least you know where your car is now." Are you kidding me? Even I can relate to facing such an issue, matter of fact. The other day, a family friend and I contacted the police along with the ambulance to get a roommate of ours to the hospital because he was a drug addict, right? We weren't taking him to the hospital because he was a drug addict, but for some reason that night, he just chose to go full Tarzan on the entire house, full George of the Jungle. He was screaming like a girl in a Chris Brown concert. The entire house was smelling like weed, and he was just bonkers that night. There was no way we were safe with that dude in there. Bear in mind, we had class tomorrow. So it was either he kept us up that night or we did something about it, right? So when we called the police, common sense, we called the police and the ambulance. We called them at around 9 p.m. Keep that in mind. You want to guess what time they arrived? Whatever time you guessed, you were being too kind because they arrived at 4 a.m. That's right. You remember when I said we still had class tomorrow? Psh, it's not their problem, am I right? I mean, who said have a drug addict for a roommate? As if we had a choice. I mean, they were just doing their jobs, am I right? And that's arriving 7 hours after we called them. 7 hours. We could have gotten a good night's rest by the time they arrived. If only we knew they'd come that late. Bear in mind, my friend and I are 18 and 19 years old at the time. The drug addict roommate was close to his 30s. He could have gotten violent with us at any time, maybe stab us when we were half asleep waiting for the cops to show up and take him away because he knew we called them. Anything could have happened that night. Bottom line, in those 7 hours, a drug addict was in the house with a couple of teenagers who were supposed to be sleeping for school tomorrow. But again, it's not their problem, right? It was our problem. And don't even get me started on their response to petty crimes. If you were to report a stolen phone to them, for example, they'd look at you like you just asked them to solve the mysteries of the universe. Did you try calling it? They'll ask. Yeah, officer, let me just give the thief a quick ring and ask them to kindly return my Samsung. Sure, why not? Why didn't I think of that? Now let's move on to SAPS's biggest talent, disappearing. If you've ever called the South African police force in this country, you'll know what I'm talking about. You report a crime, they'll promise they'll be there shortly, which in SAPS language means sometime now and the second coming of Christ. There are stories of people waiting hours like me, even days for officers to show up. You could call that your sister was raped or something and the criminal was still in the house. They would come maybe 3 days later. Is she dead? We don't know. It's not their problem. It's not entirely their fault though, am I right? Because the system is so broken, the most dedicated officers are set up to fail, unfortunately. The response time is often as a direct result of underfunding, poor resource allocation, and vehicles that are more likely to break down than actually reach the crime scene you complained about. But still, it's not hard to laugh when you hear about someone reporting a burglary, only for the police to show up after the criminals have already pawned the stolen goods and used the money to start a small business, gangan. And another thing is SAPS isn't just a police force. I call it a meme factory, and here's why. Their social media presence is like that one uncle who tries to be funny at Bryce but ends up embarrassing everyone. They post things like, "Be vigilant this festive season. Criminals are watching. Yeah, thanks for that, Sherlock. No shit, Sherlock. We should have guessed. We should have guessed that December. We would have never guessed that December is a hotspot for crime. Maybe that's why so many people are with stab wounds at Liratong hospitals or something. They'll just stand there with straight faces in the news and say things like, "We are investigating this matter thoroughly." Thoroughly? You mean the way you thoroughly search for a missing person by glancing out your office window and saying, Aish, maybe they'll come back? That thoroughly? Got it. But of course, being South African means finding humor in even the most absurd situations. Am I right? And SAPS provides plenty of that material, pardon my Greece. There is an infamous story of a police officer who got robbed. Yes, by the very criminals they were supposed to be arresting. Or the time when SAPS mistakenly arrested an innocent man because his name was similar to a wanted criminal's. Are you kidding me? It's like they're playing a real life version of Guess Who, but with less accuracy than the actual show. And who can forget the iconic scene of officers attempting to disperse a protest by throwing tear gas canisters, only for the wind to blow the gas right back at them? It's moments like these where you wonder if SAPS is secretly being directed by a comedy genius like Leon Schuster. But let's zoom out for a moment and look at the bigger picture. Because SAPS didn't just start being very unreliable out of nowhere, right? Obviously, it's a result of something bigger. And that bigger thing is a culture that prioritizes short-term pleasures over long-term progress. I've said this many times, and I'll give you an example one more time, just to put you on game. Because nowhere is this more evident than how South Africans celebrate. New Year's Eve, for example, is treated like the Olympics of bad decisions around here. People are popping champagne bottles like they just won the lottery, drinking more beer than Stone Cold Steve Austin on a Monday Night Raw, except the only prize they're waking up to is not a WWE championship or millions of people chanting your name. No, it's an empty bank account and a splitting headache. Meanwhile, their children are going back to school in 2 weeks and they still haven't bought uniforms or stationery. That's just the harsh reality around here. It's like there's a national competition to see who can drink the most and who can be the most financially irresponsible. Fireworks are shot into the sky like money doesn't exist, while the actual rich people are sitting at home planning on how to make even more money off the very people celebrating. It's a vicious slavery cycle, and SAPS is just one of the many results of that cycle. Just another cog in the machine, in other words. But at the heart of this all is what I like to call the slave mindset. Because it's a belief that as long as you can drown your sorrows in alcohol and flashy displays of wealth, everything will be fine. But guess what? It's not fine. It's anything but fine. While you're out here celebrating mediocrity, the people who actually run this country are planning how to keep you in the same cycle of poverty and dependence, and are planning on how you can make your children work for their children. Think about it. The business owners who sell you alcohol and fireworks are the same people who benefit from your lack of financial planning. They know you'll be broke come January, but they also know you'll come crawling back to buy school supplies and groceries on credit. It's a masterclass in economic manipulation, and you fall for it every single year. So where does SAPS fit into this? Well, a competent police force is one of the pillars of a functioning society. Without it, chaos reigns and the cycle of poverty and crime continues unchecked. But SAPS can't do its job properly when it's hamstrung by budget cuts, corruption, and a lack of accountability. I mean, really, if South Africans want real change, it starts with holding institutions like SAPS accountable. Demand better equipment from your government, better training, better leadership, and police officers who don't have bellies bigger than your fathers. Stop calling for mediocrity and short-term thinking. Call for bigger things in the long run, because it's only that way you will have a serving SAPS. So here's the takeaway. SAPS is broken, but it's not beyond repair. The real question is, do we care enough to fix it, or are we content to keep laughing at the absurdity while the country continues to suffer? And as you're busy celebrating this new year, maybe think twice before blowing your entire paycheck on alcohol and fireworks. Save that money. Invest in your family. Hell, save up for John Cena's farewell tour if you have to. At least that will give you a story worth telling, right? I attended John Cena's last ever match. That is a story right there. But nonetheless, this is a story of a nation that prioritizes fleeting pleasures over lasting progress. And until that changes, SAPS will remain a tragic comedy we've come to know and tolerate. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, or should I say, my SAPS Talk by the Summer Sandwich. Let's hope they don't arrest me for this one. Although knowing SAPS, they'll probably show up next year or something. So until then, so long, suckers.